Well, I was born into the family of Ivan and Della Miller. At that time, living on a farm near Summit Mills, Pennsylvania. My parents were married rather young, and they were rather poor, but then they had the opportunity to rent a farm over there at Summit Mills. Then, when I was not quite 2 years old yet, is when my parents bought his father's farm, which then was called Maple Shade Farm near Grantsville off Dorsey Hotel Road. So I grew up on Maple Shade Farm. It was a small farm, but made a little more labor intensive with things like chickens and a sugar camp, and throughout many of my growing up years, not all of them, but my parents had an egg route in Cumberland, 25 miles east, and would every week have regular customers where they'd go and retail eggs and so on. So that was my growing up there on that farm. I was a farm boy. Started to school at Yoder School when I was 6 years old. School was a public school, but all these students were Amish or Mennonite. So I completed 7 years of elementary school. That's what Maryland required at the time. They were not enforcing compulsory attendance at that time. And age 13 then, I stayed home. I remember walking behind the plow with a team of horses. And the first year after I didn't go back to school, I saw my friends walking to school. There were rumors that they're going to enforce the compulsory attendance laws, and I hoped they'd get around to it, so I'd have to go back to school. But that didn't happen, so I did not need to go back to school. And I, with most of my friends at that time, my many cousins, we were just farm boys, worked without pay till we were 21, and I just thought that's the normal thing, and I couldn't quite imagine what these city people do, you know, when they can't work on the farm. I thought I had a good life, and I was not resentful at all. I thought it's the right thing, you know, it's the best thing anyway.
I was born to Norman and Beulah Bender, and we lived on a farm close to Springs, Pennsylvania. It was about a mile to Springs, and that's where I went to school then, public school. I didn't go to school. In Pennsylvania, you didn't need to go to school till you're 8 years old. I wanted to go to school so badly, but my parents needed me to help take care of the little ones. But when I was 2.5 years old, not quite a half year old, our house burnt down. The house burnt down March the 12th, and my baby sister Arlene was born April the 22nd. They were in the process of rebuilding, but of course they had to have a place to live, and there was a garage on the property, and they built a brooder house attached to it. So that's where we lived most of the summer till October. My mama's diary says that. I really liked school, and I always wanted to teach. So in the summertime, we had a big rock. I would take my school papers, and I saved everything, and I'd go down there and watch the cows so they don't go to the cornfield, which was not fenced off. And I would teach my younger brothers and sisters. So I always had it in mind that I liked my school teachers, and I thought they did a good job. I wanted to be a school teacher. And I liked the church too. Oh, I loved the singing at Maple Glen. It was so beautiful. And then at Christmas time, they always have a program, and we have practice. So there were a lot of enjoyable things.
I was from Grantsville, she was from Springs, and our homes were 3 miles apart. But at least though she got to go to the better school in Pennsylvania, that was...
Did you attend Maple Glen as well, David? Did you grow up at Maple Glen?
Yes, I grew up there also, and and I just thought we had probably the best church in the country, is the way I felt about it.
So David, when did you start noticing a young lady by the name of Irma? How did that come about?
Well, I'm not sure when I first started on that journey, but I do know that when I was 16 that I sort of had an eye on her, and there was this age problem. She's 4.5 years older. At 16, that's a factor. And yet there just wasn't any other girl like her, I thought. One interesting happened though. I had a neighbor, Alvin Yoder. He was sort of the matchmaking kind. He got to talk to me one time, and he had a list of girls that I ought to consider. And Irma Bender was one of those girls. And I thought, well, if he thinks of that, maybe there is a possibility. I also made a decision then that I better wait to ask her for a date until I'm 18. More chance that way, I thought. Part of our culture was we did not have a lot of casual dating, or almost only the really furry ones might have done that once in a while. Also, to have a date with a girl, you didn't take her out, you took her home after the singing or after the church service. You took her home and spent the evening in her home. And it was also known that the guys are supposed to be on their way home by midnight and not stay beyond midnight. The real crisis to me, that seemed so drastic, one evening at the supper table then, my sister Esther just kind of casually said, Irma Bender's going to Dover, Delaware to teach school. Uh-oh. And I just imagined all kinds of young guys there in Delaware, you know, ready to get after her. I remember that evening I walked out to the Bill Bender woods and I just prayed. The Lord answered my prayer. After she's there a year, she came back for the summer and I was 18, and I just couldn't quite get the nerve to take action then. And,
wasn't that the year that I worked in Kentucky then?
Well, you did some things like that, some traveling VS, short term here and there, various places wanted her services. But finally August came and I knew I had to do something. So that evening, before going to the singing, my dad said to me, he said, David, would you mind taking the pickup tonight so we can load the car to start off for conference in Iowa tomorrow morning early? And I just looked at him, I said, Papa, ich brauche Keaudenovet. Papa, I need the car tonight. He just backed right off. And after the singing, I kept on watching where she is, and I saw her get into a car with her friend Mildred Miller, who was dating Elam Bender. And here Irma and Mildred walked to Elam's car and got into it, and Elam was with a circle of guys talking. So I joined that circle. And then all of a sudden Elam said, well, guys, I gotta go. So I caught Elam then and said, I need help. And I didn't want to go through a mediator, I wanted to ask her directly. We arranged then to meet at the end of the lane there at Dorsey Hotel Road on my home farm. So I took my sisters home. I was still being secretive. As I look back, I don't think it was good that it was so secretive, but that's the way it was. Elam told me later he had a flat tire he had to take care of. But then real soon they came and she agreed that I could take her home. I walked up to the passenger car where she sat. I don't remember if she opened the door. If I did, I think she did probably. Stepped out and I asked her if I could accompany her home, and she agreed and went back to the car. Then started going to her house. Then she explained that she had their family car sitting out at Miller Machine Works there on the 669. That worked out very well because I could get the car back quicker, but the important thing was I arranged to take her home the next Sunday night. then the next Sunday night, I arranged that we'd be writing letters when she goes back. And so we were going steady, and it was going steady ever since.
He helped me into the car, opened the door, and he knew his cousin was driving up, and he quickly shut the door and he caught my heel.
To this day yet, there at Shiloh, when we go out to the car together, if I opened the door for her, I said, "Have your foot in?" I think it was 2.5 years of dating till we got married, yeah. Well, the wedding was at Maple Glen, the building that's there now. And our weddings were pretty much a church service. In our case, it was a double wedding. Her sister Miriam and Creed Yoder were married in the same service there.
Well, it was exciting. It was on a Sunday evening, right?
Yes.
Yeah, on a Sunday evening. And we didn't go on a honeymoon, but we had a cabin in the woods by the Castleman River, and so that is where we went that night.
So we really lived there then the first 3 months of our marriage in that cabin, without electricity, without telephone, without running water. We hold the water down from the farm for use. In the meantime, they were building a garage up on the farm, and which was then first made into a dwelling for us, and we moved into that. And we then farmed 2 years on my home farm there as sharecropping for 2 years. So that's what we did at first.
We had Phyllis, and then 2 years later we had James, and Laban was that 2 years.
About 1.5 years, I think.
And then we moved to the farm, Alan Yoder's farm, right beside Maple Glen. And he was in the lot, you know what the lot is, 3 times. And he was not the one.
By the 3rd time then, I felt one angle of disappointment. I thought maybe the Lord's going to take us somewhere else. I didn't want to go anywhere else. I didn't have that kind of vision at all. But then the Lord did lead us to Flint, Michigan, and we've been here in Ohio ever since, and various kinds of things. And in each case, I was confident that I was in the Lord's will, doing what the Lord had for me. But it is a traumatic thing, though, to be in the lot, whether chosen or not. Growing up, I never imagined I'd live anywhere except right there. Didn't want to, really. I thought I'd be a farmer. Growing up, that's what I thought I'd be. And I thought maybe I'd be a preacher. I couldn't quite tell how I thought so. I thought maybe it's just seeing my grandfathers and father on the preacher's bench that I got that idea, but any idea of being a preacher would have been bivocational. And so I really thought I'd be a farmer throughout my adult life is what I had in mind at that point.
As a young person, single, I thought I might be a missionary to Africa. I sort of had that kind of vision. But I was satisfied with the way things were going. But the mission board asked us to go to Flint. I thought, oh, taking these children to a city, and that didn't feel real good to me. When Phyllis was born, between 3 and 4 months, she didn't gain a bit. I know that both mothers, my mother and David's mother, thought she wasn't going to make it. And she was in the Pittsburgh hospital at one time. And so I always thought of that time, how alone I was in the garage, walking back and forth and just praying for her, but also feeling that I want to be submissive to God, whatever He decides to do. Seeing how God worked there, I knew that it's the same God that is going with us.
When we first went, we were fully supported by the mission board. That's before the term RMM had come into use yet. And then I did some part-time things. And something I was used to back home was an egg route in Cumberland, Maryland. So I found an egg farmer up toward Vassar somewhere where I would go and buy eggs and then establish a route around town and sell eggs as one way of earning. So I had the children pack those eggs. They go along and be in the car and pack those eggs from the big cases into the 1 dozen size cases. And they claimed that I paid them so much per dozen, but at the same time then, if they cracked an egg, then I subtracted a certain amount, and I think they needed a union or something to get this straightened out a little better than what they thought was a fair deal. But at least it produced character. I can tell by looking at them now that it was a good thing that I did there. So I had some jobs like that along the way. I was pastor of South Flint Mennonite Church, is the name it had at that time. This was the first mission in the Conservative Conference. I was there as pastor, so I did preaching every Sunday. The first sermon I preached as a licensed minister was in Flint there. I'd never preached anything that was called a sermon. I'd spoken sometimes in Sunday evening Bible meetings and things like that.
Our house was right beside the church house, and it was sort of like through the week our house was open. Sunday morning, we had the young people's Sunday school class in our living room. So to get the children to church and get the house ready, and that was always sort of the time factor. I didn't have enough time the way it felt.
After pastoring there 8 or 9 years, I got a contact then from the RBC. Well, first of all, they'd asked me to come for winter term to teach for a 6-week term. So I did that for 2 or 3 years, commuted. But then they asked me to come and be full-time faculty. So we felt that that's what the Lord was asking us to do. And in Rosedale, 1972, and I taught a good part of an academic year, and then moved over to the conference office. I still did some part-time teaching then after that too. But then I served in RMM as president 17 and a half years. That gets us up to 1990, I believe. And then by that time, the conference had decided to establish a conference office and to have it what was called a general secretary. That office had not existed before. So that went to 2003. At that point then, I'd served the conference in one way or another for 40 years and hit age 70. And I thought I'd maybe better retire before they make me do it. And I still wore a conference hat, though. I was then conference historian for a bunch of years. Can't remember what year I dropped out of that. And archivist took care of the archive there. So once in a while, it still strikes me sort of crazy that we live in Ohio. Why live in Ohio? You know, that isn't where I used to think I'd live someday. But I do not have regrets about any of those decisions. We had rented a house, the Cecil House. One day Laban said, "Dad, next summer, instead of us working for a contractor, let's build a house." I liked the idea, but didn't know how we could swing it. Thought it was clear that if 3 things fall into place, we ought to do it. One is if we can find a place that's within walking distance of the missions office. And another, if we can find financing at a good rate. And a third one, if we can find a contractor who will give us advice. So those things all fell in place. That was in '76, and we lived there till 2004.
Irma, could you tell us why you moved to London? Why did you?
Because he retired, and we have 2 daughters living here, and we like it.
So what places do you enjoy spending your time when you're here at the house in these days?
I can feel achy and so on, and I sit down, turn on a light, a health light that 2 of my daughters gave me, turn on the heater at the bottom. I have my Bibles and concordance and everything is there. Nobody messes with it but me. And I just love that spot. The older I get, the more I need heat and light and that kind of stuff. And so it gives me mental light, spiritual light. That is the spot. And I am too busy. I'm always writing. I don't know why I think I have to write, but like things that happened on Sunday in church, I like to write that. And it's too good to lose it. And so I keep writing.
Well, if I just want to relax, this recliner here that has a footrest that comes out, you know, that's the most comfortable place in the house as far as sitting somewhere.
That's where he reads his Bible.
But my study is a very favorite place for me. I spend a lot of time there working on projects.
How many children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren?
7 children, each one has a spouse. Phyllis, James, Laban, Kenneth, Janice, Kevin, Linda. 19 grandchildren. I believe 11 have a spouse, and we have, I think, 26 great-grandchildren, I believe.
What are the hopes that you have for them? How do you pray for them? Irma, why don't we start with you?
Well, I pray that if they're married, that their marriages last. That is one very big concern. Salvation, of course, that they take that seriously, that they're all ready to meet the Savior. And also that they spread the good news, that they're able to spread the good news too.
Well, for one thing, I don't know what somebody born now will face if they live to be old. But just to be confident, though, that God is God, and to get to know Jesus Christ well enough to trust Him, and to stick with the Word, especially understanding the New Covenant in the New Testament and not confuse the Old Covenant as our guide for life. The Old Covenant is very important for understanding all that God has done and to understand God Himself. But it's very clear in especially the book of Hebrews and Galatians and Corinthians that it's been replaced and not only, and fulfilled in the sense of, in some sense, also being superseded. So be a New Testament follower of Jesus Christ.
And to keep feeding on the Word, not neglect the Word.